Good morning. Welcome to Las Vegas. First of all, I'd like to thank each one of you for coming to. It's 9 o'clock in the morning in Las Vegas. Obviously, is still early, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day and coming out and hopefully learning a few things about how to better manage your insurance costs. Always my objective is to, after the presentation, always is to leave you with one, two, or a few nuggets that you can take back to your organization and assist you in, especially from an insurance standpoint, have a better insurance, loss control, risk management program. So again, I hope today that we will actually provide you some underwriting secrets that will assist you in having a better program, better price program. So let's talk about what impacts your premium. And some of this is very common sense, but at the same time it's important from the standpoint of understanding all the things, all the factors that go into the premium development associated with every insurance program, whether it's one location or 100 locations. But let's begin by looking at all the various factors: geographic location, your building characteristics, your claim experience obviously becomes a factor. The management experience, which sometimes we don't think about as an important element, but it is taken into consideration by the underwriting team when looking at a particular risk. The risk management program, agent experience and presentation, policy components, and we'll wrap it up with carrier considerations. So let's talk about in terms of the goal of the insurance. I think when we're talking to our agent, and hopefully you do spend time with your agent each year on an annual basis or a 6-month basis, and to go over your insurance program, because I think that's a critical process. But one of the primary objective of your agent as a professional agent is to make you whole. At the end, in the event of a loss, is to get you back to that place in time where you're back doing business, creating the level of revenue that you need in order to have a profitable business. That's why we're in business, is to make a profit. So the goal of the agent is to get you back to that pre-loss condition. I can't tell you how many times throughout the years, and I've been doing this over 30 years, one of the biggest elements that, for example, business interruption, individuals, companies not having proper business interruption have not been able to get back to that pre-loss condition because of the fact that they were losing revenue during that renovation process, rebuilding process. And the other element is on the insurance side of it, is the liability exposure, is to obviously provide you the limits, the coverages that you need in the event that you are faced with a lawsuit. And in the 17 years that I've been doing self-storage, we're faced with lawsuits on a regular basis. So it's very important that you have that type of coverage, and that's the objective of the agent, to make sure you do. Your agent's job is to provide you the best program, and I think this is a critical point that I want to leave with you, and not the best price. Now, I've thought about this after I looked at this over and over and have practiced this presentation, and really best price, probably I should have said lowest price, because there is a best price, best coverage. But at the end of the day, don't look for that lowest price in terms of, don't make that your primary objective, because I think you can lose out many times by making that your primary objective. The actions of you and your team can definitely affect your insurance premium on a positive or a negative way. And the risk management steps that you take as an owner are going to assist you in lowering your premium and will make your facility a better operation, better safety and security. So I probably in the last few years have migrated more and more to promoting loss control and risk management to the self-storage industry. And I think that it's critical because sometimes we forget about the fact that, or don't think about the fact that, one major loss in the southern part of your state, it doesn't have an impact on you. Well, overall, it can and it does from the standpoint of the actuarial rating, the way that the carriers develop their rates. They take into consideration a total class of business. So it's important as an overall industry that we really focus on risk management and loss control within our industry. So let's go through the elements that we discussed originally. Geographic location. Let's look at the in terms of geographic location, one of the things that we want to point out is that you're probably going to, I guess in essence, in simplicity, expect a higher premium in higher areas such as coastal, where you've got wind and flood exposures. I expect higher premiums in tornado risk areas, hail risk areas, wildfire risk areas, and some general liability exposure areas where, from a standpoint of a jurisdiction, particular jurisdiction, sometimes there's higher liability claims paid in those areas. Those are all important. In most cases, there's not one thing you can do about it. The key thing here is for you to be aware of that whether you're building a new facility or you have an existing facility, that these type of risks do exist, and obviously you're probably going to pay a little more in premium as a result of that. Here's just a quick look of, when we talk about coastal wind areas, specifically we're looking at primarily Maine through Texas, that we've got tools today, a variety of different tools. Because of the data available, the various tools available, we can pretty well tell, without even looking at a map, there's rating associated with particular areas that in that rating the underwriters are looking at as it pertains to your particular premium and how your premium will be developed. Here's another example of tornado risk. And again, these things do change, but at the present time, when we pulled up this information, this is where we were able to identify in these particular areas, these particular states are today identified as high-risk areas as far as tornado risk. In your hail risk, I know in the 30 years I've been doing in the business, I've seen the hail risk exposure migrate throughout the U.S. and the different parts of the U.S. But today, here's an example of where we see some of the highest hail exposure in the U.S. In terms of wildfire risk, you can see most of the western states. And as most of you know, there's been significant fires over the last few years in some of these areas. And it has impacted our industry. We've had risks that have experienced significant loss because of these wildfires. So let's move on to building characteristics. The key building characteristics, and again, if you already have an existing location, there's not a whole lot you can do in reference to these building characteristics. But there are the things you can do to help your premium I'll talk about. But one of the first things that we do that obviously impacts your premium is your construction. And we'll talk more about that. Your value obviously is going to have an impact on your premium. The age of your building, whether it was originally built for self-storage or it's a conversion. We're seeing a lot more conversions today than we have in the past. The sprinkler system, installed sprinkler systems, there's an objective obviously to mitigate fire losses, but that's going to always provide you a discount on your insurance premium. And then security is looked at on a regular basis in terms of the type of security, from cameras to lighting and gates, things of that nature. How is what now? It actually can be good, you know, in terms of the, a conversion definitely can be, because of the zoning requirements, the ordinance, the codes, that particular location has to be brought up to that. So from a rating standpoint, it can be, and I'll touch on that, and it can be a very positive thing. These are what we consider, in our particular program, 4 classes of business that we look at. And there's 4 different types that we look at. And each one of them, based on that particular construction, helps us in developing the rate, the premium for that particular type, for that particular building. Most buildings in the U.S., I would say 75% or greater, are going to be your type 2 building, primarily metal walls, metal doors, metal roofs. And so let's move on to the next particular example. And I wanted to just show you especially in the event that you're building, and there's a lot of reason you utilize particular type of construction for a self-storage risk, but here's a good example of the difference in those type of, in terms of cost. We put together an example of where you've got a frame versus a metal building, same values, same limits, same coverages, in the same state, and you can see there's a significant difference in almost 3 times the cost from a metal building to a frame building. So that just gives you an example of how much the construction of the type of construction can impact your premium. In terms of the building value, I think everyone understands the difference between market value and your replacement cost. Because most of the industry is written by what we refer to up there as a BOP, a business owner policy, the goal is to write at 100% of replacement cost, whatever your facilities. And as you note, we've got tools that help us and identify that particular value. And there is no co-insurance on a business owner policy, meaning that you, in some cases where you may have a policy, I don't see it very often, where you've got an 80% co-insurance. So on a $1 million building, you're only required to carry at least $800,000. There's no co-insurance on a business owner policy, so you're required to carry at least 100% of the replacement cost. Blanket coverage is very important in terms of our particular industry. As most of you know, unless you've got a multi-story, one building, but most of our industry, you've got multiple locations, multiple buildings at a location, and we call it a blanket coverage, where we basically insure the total value on our policy, where if it's a $2 million, where you've got 5 buildings, $2 million, we're going to give it one value. And I could go into a lot of detail in terms of the value of that, but the point is there is blanket coverage. It's important that for you to know when working with your agent, are each one of things being valued, or do I have blanket coverage on all of my buildings? Because when it comes to a claim, having blanket coverage can be a significant benefit to you. The main thing I skipped over one area is to know what's covered and what's not covered. In a simple way to state in terms of building coverages, most items that are attached to buildings are going to be covered under your building coverage. Now, our particular program, we also pick up fences, signs, sidewalks, driveways, all of those elements that are to your benefit in terms of covered under your building coverage. That's another question you want to know, ask your agent is, are these particular items covered under my building coverage or not, or do I need to be covering them under a separate, scheduling them to make sure that there is coverage. But the critical thing is to make sure there is coverage for those items. And then one of the things that there's always negotiation, discussions about value, because individuals are, they're trying to, enhance, improve their insurance program. And as a result of that, we have the talk about back and forth with the agent talks to the self-storage operator. I can rebuild it for this amount. Our tool says it's this amount. So there's always back and forth, and if the agent and the operator can provide us documentation in terms of they could be a general contractor, they may have some benefit, they may have pre-bought steel. I mean, there could be a variety of things, but I jumped down to the last item there. We have a tool, Marshall Swift Beck tool, that we utilize within the industry. It's very standard throughout the industry. And it's a tool that we utilize in helping us determine the value of your building. And so at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you're properly insured. There's probably a variety of reasons you think why we're trying to get to that point, but the last thing we want is for you to be underinsured. So we work diligently, and that's one of the most critical elements of your policy, is to make sure that your values of your buildings and everything associated with your buildings are properly insured. One thing, but I'll touch on this, but just on that last thing, as everyone knows today, there are some inflationary factors that are going into effect right now, for example, with steel. And so the steel costs have increased. Now, eventually it'll stabilize, but as a result of that steel cost increasing, it is something to go back to your agent and just make sure that are my values proper with what's happening in the industry right now. And at the other point about the fluctuation in terms of, especially if you're in high-risk areas, the ones that I noted on the map, that in the event that you do have catastrophic events, I think, again, it would be common sense for us to think in terms of you're going to see higher costs associated with material and labor because of the demand down in that particular area. So if you're in those areas, think in terms of that when you start talking about and with your agent about building your building value. In terms of building age, the underwriter's looking at that. They're getting in the submission from your agent, they're looking at the building age, and it's part of the underwriting process. And one of the things that I would share today, that if your building's 30 years or older, one of the key areas that they're going to be looking at is upgrades. Have you upgraded your roof? Have you upgraded your plumbing, doors, electrical? All these things are going to impact your premium. Most cases, you can get a quote. If you haven't had those upgrades, you can get a quote in most cases, but you might pay a little higher premium as a result of the fact that you have not upgraded your facility. So it's important. Upgrades are something that we look at, and you can basically consider the fact that if you're doing it, you could get credits. If you're not doing it, there's probably going to be surcharges on your particular pricing. Back to your question on conversions. Conversions are going to be rated with the original construction. And most of the time, the conversions, most of what's occurring, and there's always exceptions to everything, but in most cases, the big boxes, the Walmarts, the supermarkets, the car dealerships that are being converted, most of the conversion, I would say, are the metal, the internal elements that are going in. And that is a consideration, but the building itself primarily is going to be rated on the basis of the shell of the building. And in most cases, you can probably get the rating could be a much better rated, rating as a result of that particular construction, because it is better built in some cases than just a metal building is. So you get the benefit of the original construction. But at the same time, you may be paying higher, the values may be higher just because of the square footage. But there is a benefit, there is nothing, I wouldn't say, I think conversions, we look at them positively. from an underwriting standpoint. And again, most of the time we're asking about what upgrades have occurred within the, if it's an older building, we're still looking for the upgrades, the electrical, the roof, the things of that nature. Sprinkler systems, again, the primary objective of a sprinkler system is to mitigate your loss in the event of a catastrophic event such as a fire. But the one thing it's just always important, to check with your agent. Am I getting a discount? I've got sprinkler systems, and am I getting the discount? Can you show me the discount? How's the impact on my premium? Security, again, security is critical from an underwriting standpoint. And I'll go into how it impacts your premium in just a few minutes, but from the underwriter, they're looking at the entire operation, the gates, the security lights, the cameras. All those elements improve the assessment of the underwriter, and as it pertains to where am I going to get to from a pricing standpoint. And obviously, again, common sense is security is going to limit your potential claim activity exposures associated with your operation. The underwriters recognize that. The better security, the better the pricing. And security equipment, the last item there was security equipment that's, again, normally is going to fall under your building value. So if you add a significant dollar value in terms of security equipment, make sure your building values are adjusted to address that added security. Claim experience, I didn't go into a whole lot of detail here. I just wanted to make sure that everyone understood it's a fairly simple calculation the underwriter goes through. There's a lot of factors that go into this, but basically, if you have a premium of $5,500 and your annual claim loss are $500, it's a very simple calculation of $5,500 divided by 500 gives you a loss ratio of 11%. From an industry standard, in looking at the self-storage industry, one of our goals is in terms of risk, not only our overall program, but individual locations. We're looking our goal and objective is to keep that less than 50%. And then again, there's a variety of reasons for that, but this is looked at as positively by the underwriter. I would say that the majority, the majority of the industry, and when I say majority, it probably is as high as 80–85%, have a 0% loss ratio. So there's fairly a small percentage of the industry does experience claims, but again, unfortunately we can't choose who's going to have a claim and who doesn't have a claim, and so that's why it's important to have the programs in place. I think one of the things I just wanted to make sure covered this morning is that in terms of claims, and again, it doesn't matter what size of operation you are, but I think it's critical that you don't ever be surprised by your claim experience. And by this, I know that probably if you've had a claim, you turn it into your agent, the agent turns it into the carrier, and I don't know every one of you, of course, and I don't know how you manage your particular operation, but some cases once we turn it over, we kind of forget about it. I think the message here that I want to try to convey is the importance of making sure you follow that claim through resolution. And it really doesn't matter how severe that claim is. I think it sets an expectation for your agent that you're going to be contacting him, and you want to know what the settlement of the claim has been. And in most cases, obviously, they're going to work with you and work with the carrier to keep you informed about what the status is. And so at the end of the year, at your annual renewal, you're not learning that all of a sudden that what you considered a simple claim was a $500,000 settlement by the insurance company. and it could have been definitely the insurance company doesn't just pay out money, but there are a variety of reasons that settlement occurs, and as a result, it impacts your loss ratio, which there's a good probability you're going to pay a higher premium as a result of that. So stay on top of that. There might be some information that you can provide that could impact the way the claim is settled. That's important to keep that communication open. And one of the last things that I point out here is that if you do have a claim, and especially from an underwriting standpoint, if you do have a claim, to make sure that you've documented the corrective measures, taken the time out from an operational standpoint with your team, yourself, whoever, and identify what could we do in the future to avoid this particular type of claim, and document that in writing, because that type of documentation tells the underwriter a story in terms of type of management of your particular operation. You're being proactive to take care of these things. Management experience. Now, one of the things, again, it is what it is, and in terms of the underwriter is looking at your particular location, and they're asking the agent about you because they want to know, do you have experience in specifically managing a self-storage risk? And I know a lot of operators today, they use third-party management companies. That's an important factor that the agent needs to share with our underwriters, because that impacts in terms of their assessment of the risk. But the quality of the management is a factor, is looked at. When the agent provides this information to the underwriter, it's important for them to talk about the management and to share everything that they know about the management as it pertains to association membership, leadership roles, in anything of that, whether it's voluntary work, anything that shows the type of individual you are in terms of from a leadership standpoint, designations, degrees, all those things play into helping that underwriter assess your particular risk and can impact the pricing of your risk. Let's move on to risk management program. And like I said earlier, over the last several years, risk management has become one of my focal points in trying to communicate on a regular basis the importance of risk management. The key thing from a standpoint of risk management is that it does have to come top down. You as the owner-operator, you've got to establish the importance of and create the culture as it pertains to risk management. Creating that risk-aware culture is a key factor in terms of your claim activity. And the basic elements of risk management, as stated here, are to identify, measure, manage, and mitigate the risk that you may have on at your operation. And it's important that you train your managers to go through that process as they walk through the facility. You create awareness, and as they walk through the facility, because of the training and the importance that you've placed on risk management, they're looking and they're identifying exposures. Just a great example, I did supermarket insurance for 10 years before I got into the self-storage industry, and one of the things that always amazed me was that prior to the training, you could see an employee walking down an aisle and step into a puddle of water up to their neck and just keep on moving and going on to their next job task. But after the training, amazingly, then you would see them stop, go get a cone, put a cone down, get on the loudspeaker and say, we need cleanup on aisle 7. But again, sometimes the expectation we may have of a manager to recognize these things may not be where it should be in terms of it's up to us to create the awareness. And as a result of that continued awareness, that has an impact on your safety, your loss control within your operation. And at the end, as the objective of our talk today, it will impact your premium pricing. In terms of risk management program, what we're looking at from an underwriting assessment, we're looking to see do you have a written plan? What is the employee training associated with that plan? How is it executed? What are the documentation? Things like premise inspections. Are you documenting that? Are you documenting the fact that the individual is being trained, you and your manager is being trained? All of these elements, again, the more of this information that is provided to the underwriter, I almost can guarantee better pricing when you have this type of information documented and presented to the underwriter. Key elements of the risk management program, premise inspection, we've touched on that and the importance of that. Contract review, we definitely highly recommend from the standpoint of that you have legal representation looking at all of your contracts to make sure that you're not taking on additional exposure or agreeing to take on additional exposure that you really had no intent or your insurance company had no intent that you're taking. So it's important that any contracts that you sign associated with your operation be reviewed by legal. Specific self-storage lease wording has become more and more important. I think that's one of the elements from the underwriting standpoint that we look at. The underwriters, when a submission comes in, part of that submission is the lease. We're looking for valuation clauses. It's become very important today in the legal world from the standpoint of self-storage that you put in a valuation clause, and that assists you. Is there anyone that's not familiar with the valuation clause, or I could talk a little more about that, okay, I won't go into more detail, but the valuation clause is important. The hold harmless, the responsibility of insuring their goods in their facility, that's something we look at. We look at hazardous material clauses. That's a critical element. Kind of back to premise inspections, one of the things I've thought about, and I think it's fairly common, but it probably needs to be done more often, is that in new move-ins that a manager does take the time to walk out and watch, at least observe initial move-ins to see, and again, if you've got a lot of activity that becomes more difficult, but by going out and observing initial move-in, you get to see what type of content is being put in your facility. And someone was talking last night about some type of containers that actually had written on it hazardous material being put into the unit. Obviously, you would want to approach that individual and find out is that truly hazardous material, and obviously point out to them the lease in terms of the hazardous material clause. And it's critical in terms of the premise inspections, more so today than ever, that we've seen probably an increase in fire activity throughout the industry. And as a result of that, we've been looking into, what's causing that. And still, probably 90% of the cause of the fires, and whether they're small or major, and most of the time any fire is major, because it's going to not only cause the initial damage to the area, it also causes smoke damage to other areas of your facility. But it's important that in your premise inspections, and this comes with training and creating that risk-aware culture, it's important that you communicate that if you, as a manager, if you do see lease violators, that you approach them, or depending on the situation, if you're concerned with your physical being, then have either call call law enforcement or call your management company or someone that you feel comfortable with approaching them, or even if it's fairly minor, send them out emails or communicate with them. But too many times we have situations where, as far as fires, it's individuals working on vehicles and pouring gasoline, and you've got stoves, floor stoves, and they catch fire. You've got candles being knocked over. I mean, many of these things I think we probably would see if we are doing our premise inspection. And if you are observing these things, it's critical that you stop that. So have the tenant stop their activity. Let's go back. I'm sorry, Dan. Facility premise and maintenance is truly important in documenting this and showing what you're doing from the facility. The mandatory evidence of insurance, like we talked about, we think that's definitely limits your liability when you are requiring evidence of insurance. Yes?
Yeah, I have a question regarding the balance of this type of the extra work that's required for a manager to do this, or to have yard staff or maintenance staff doing this sort of review, balance versus the additional work comp expense.
Right.
Hire staff to do this, you may be lowering one cost here, but you have increased work comp insurance.
Right.
How do you balance the two? What does an insurance carrier like to say?
Well, the personal perspective, if there are, it depends on the task. There are some tasks I wouldn't, if a manager doesn't have any experience in electrical. We've had individuals electrocuted working on gates. That's not nothing positive came out of that, and they probably didn't have the experience. So I think it depends on the skill element of the individual and their capabilities. Yes, I understand what you're asking from a workers' comp standpoint, but I'd still go back. It's important that you have to determine, does this individual have the skill to do this task? And if he doesn't, then it's important that you bring somebody in that does. And if you do bring someone in that does, make sure they have evidence of insurance, because you could end up being exposed as a result of something they do negligent, and it comes back to your insurance. So the critical thing, and we can talk offline after this, but the critical thing is to make sure anyone that does work for you has evidence of insurance, especially if they're not an employee. The other pieces are insurance and your claims process, and we need to kind of move along here pretty quick. Again, I think we've already touched on the risk management, the importance of risk management. It does, if you can communicate that program in a way to the underwriter, it does show you that you are a leader in that particular area, and you recognize the importance of the awareness and the accountability associated with risk management. Agent's experience and presentation, and I'll go through this very quickly. I think it's important in terms of your agent. There are many of you that have, there's agents throughout the U.S. that have one, there's one self-storage facility within that community, and that's the only self-storage facility they write. In many cases, you have a relationship, and you want that individual to work with you, and so that's important. If they don't have but in terms of looking at, if you're looking for an opportunity, there's many agents today, more today than there have been over the last few years, that do specialize, that do have specialization on books of self-storage. But if you're looking for someone, you want to ask them how much experience do you have in self-storage, because there are some unique risks associated, unique exposures, such as customer goods, legal liability, sale and disposal, to the self-storage industry. So it's important that you understand what to ask them if they understand what those risks are. If you're dealing with a local agent, it's important that you work with a provider that does specialize in self-storage insurance. So let's move on, Dan, in terms of the agent experience. And the other element, you're looking for someone that can provide you all the coverage. You're looking for somebody that has relationships with various independent carriers that can provide you all the coverage beyond just your building and your liability. And a couple of things: do they carry errors and omission insurance? That's professional liability insurance. And then what are their designations? Do they have any particular designations, insurance designations, or what are they doing on an annual basis from a continuing education standpoint? You're looking for someone that's keeping up to speed on the insurance laws and regulations and all the regulatory elements. So here's a critical piece that I don't want to cut this short, but at the same time I'm running out of time. But the importance here, what I'm trying to put forth to you in this particular area of the presentation, it's a critical process, critical piece of the process with the underwriting company. And all the elements that we've been talking about, that importance of documenting and making sure that you communicate, have these things in place. One of the things we don't see enough, and I would again almost guarantee a better pricing as a result of this, is to, number one, spend time with your agent. In some cases, your agents geographically can't be there, but if you can't, then spend time on the phone, whether it's an hour or 2 hours or whatever. But the key thing is, what I'm trying to talk about here is to create a presentation, a narrative, a written narrative outlining everything that we've touched on today and communicating that to the underwriter. The underwriter, in most cases, that particular risk that comes in, I would say the majority of the risks that come in are just coming in on an application, our application. The risks that come in with a narrative talking about all the things that we've discussed and communicating that in a narrative to the underwriter is going to be placed at the front of the pack. It's going to be looked at favorably. It's going to probably, in most cases, I would say, is going to be receive better pricing, because again, the underwriter recognizes that the agent has taken the time and the operator's taken the time to put this narrative together to assist in selling their location, selling their risk to this particular carrier, and it's going to be a very positive thing from a pricing standpoint. Policy components, again, during this same process, this involves also the risk analysis by the agent to go through your facility, and not, possibly even physically, but to go through all the elements that we've been talking about to make sure that they thoroughly understand the exposures related to your particular location. And the primary components impacting your premium, and these are the basic things: your property values, which we've touched on, your standard and your specialty coverages. That's the general liability, your property, and then your specialty coverages such as customer goods legal liability, sale and disposal liability, your coverage limits. Obviously, the higher, in most cases, when you talk about these elements, coverage limits are higher, you're going to pay more premium. Coverage limits lower, you're going to pay less premium. But you don't want to be just reducing your coverage limits just to reduce your premium. It could put you in a situation where you're from a claim standpoint, could be very negative. Your deductibles, most people understand higher deductibles, the lower your premium. Again, you want to be careful from a standpoint of are you financially capable? Is your company financially capable to take on a $25,000 or $100,000 deductible before you move in that direction? The risk characteristics, we're going to talk about that in the next slide. We're going to talk about there's several risk characteristics, and I'll just go through these very quickly. The building features, the premises, the site protection, the location. Let's go on down to the next. Education, employees, management. Those are all elements that, if within that narrative that I talked about, if you can go into detail about every one of these elements, it's going to impact your premium. The IRPM letters designated up there represent individual risk policy modification. And in most states, you're gonna, they have, that IRPM is a credit or a debit from 25% up to 40%. And it can go both ways. You can get 25% credit or 40% credit, or you can get a 25% debit or 40% debit, depending on the quality of the risk. And they utilize these elements, these risk characteristics in each applying numerical value to these risk characteristics. So within that narrative that I've touched on, that you work with your agent in creating, in addition to your application, go into detail about these risk characteristics. It will give you a better pricing by going into and explaining to the underwriter and helping them understand what you're doing in these particular areas. Carrier consideration, and we'll wrap it up. Again, you work with, number one, you're working with your agent, you're relying on your agent, but you want to know what is the appetite of the carrier. Are they interested in self-storage? Is self-storage a common class of business that they write for their book of business? What is their experience with self-storage? The experience has an impact on the way the claims are handled. So, and that's why we're buying insurance. So in terms of, in the event of a claim, do they have self-storage specialization? Have they been writing self-storage for a particular length of time? Are they filed rates, forms, deductibles, IRPM, other discounts? And that kind of goes into the next item, in whether they're admitted or not admitted. Admitted companies, the rates are going to be filed, the forms are going to be filed, deductibles, all the IRPM, all of those elements are going to be filed. The not admitted, there's no requirements, no regulatory requirements in the U.S. for these particular not admitted carriers to file these elements. Now, the one thing I want to make sure and clear, there's no good, bad, because in terms of not admitted doesn't make it bad or good. But the one element that I want to leave you with in terms of not admitted, to make sure you understand when you're talking to the agent, is it not admitted or is it admitted? And if it's not admitted, there is additional review of that policy, the forms, the rates, and all those elements, because it's not regulated, and there can be verbiage or clauses within that not admitted element that are not in the admitted policy. Now, I know in our particular company, we pretty well mirror our admitted program and our not admitted program are mirrored and are basically the same thing. But unfortunately, I can't guarantee that in every not admitted program out there. So it's important that you understand with the agent, spend some time to make sure, is there any differences? And whether there's AM Best rating, A or A+, we highly recommend that particular rating. How do you get the information about the carrier? Again, through your peers, through your agent, and state associations. Ask about it. Make sure you understand who's representing you, and obviously there's always Google. Summary, key elements of going to impact your premium, as we talked about: your geographic location, your building characteristics, your claim experience, management experience, risk management program, agent experience, policy components, carrier consideration. Those are all elements that are going to have an impact on your premium. Now, which of these factors are the most important? Not one is not one of these factors is probably more important than the other, but one of the positive things, one positive element can offset a critical element. So a good management program, good documented risk management program can help and included in that narrative of that the agent submits to the underwriter can offset some poor claim experience, especially if it shows what corrective measures you've taken to mitigate those future type of claims. That's all I have today. I hope, like I said, that I've left you with one or two or a few nuggets and that will benefit you. And we've got an exhibit, so we're out in the trade show. If you have any questions after, I know I've already gone past my time, please come by our exhibit, and I'll step down here afterwards. But thank you very much this morning.